I have lived on this piece of land for almost 15 years, and in all that time, I have never once thought about putting up a fence to keep people out until the HOA moved into the area and decided that every property needed to conform to their new community vision. When I bought this land, it was nothing but rough pasture and overgrown woods, the kind of place where I have lived on this piece of land for almost 15 years, and in all that time, I have never once you could hear coyotes at night and watch deer grazing just a few dozen yards away from your porch. It was my dream spot, a place where I could build my life away from the noise of the city, away from traffic, away from petty rules and people who got a thrill out of bossing their neighbors around. I wanted freedom, open sky, and space to breathe. I built my home with my own hands, a wide ranch-style house with a wraparound porch, big windows that let the morning sun in, and a solid oak front door I made myself. For years, my life here was simple. I woke up early, worked on my cattle operation, fixed fences when they broke, maintained the barn, and took care of the land. Neighbors minded their own business, and I minded mine. Then, little by little, the neighborhood changed. Wealthy transplants from the city started buying up property, building huge houses where open pasture used to be. And then came the HOA, a group of people who, in my opinion, had nothing better to do than to hold meetings, complain about the smallest things, and try to force everyone to live by their idea of perfect. At first, they tried to get me to join voluntarily, sending me polite letters in the mail with phrases like community unity and shared vision. I ignored them. I wasn't part of their subdivision, my land deed made that very clear, and I didn't want to be told what color to paint my barn or what kind of mailbox I had to install. Then the tone of their letters changed. They became more aggressive, saying I was bringing down property values by not following their guidelines, threatening to take legal action if I didn't comply. I called my lawyer, and he confirmed what I already knew: they had no legal standing over me. My land was mine, outside their jurisdiction, and they couldn't enforce a single one of their silly rules. That should have been the end of it. But then I met Karen. Karen was the HOA president, and I swear she had made it her life's mission to make me miserable. She was the kind of person who always had a phone in her hand, always ready to record something to post online or to document violations. She drove a shiny SUV, wore oversized sunglasses even when it wasn't sunny, and strutted around like she owned the place. The first time she came onto my property, she didn't bother to knock on my door. She just parked her car halfway down my driveway, got out, and started snapping pictures of my barn, my cattle, my old pickup truck sitting by the shed. I stepped out onto the porch and asked her what she thought she was doing. She just smirked and said, "We've had several complaints about this property, and I'm here to make sure it gets reported." I told her flat out that she was trespassing, that she had no authority here, and that she needed to leave immediately. She acted offended, like I was the rude one, and said something about how people like me were the reason communities needed oversight. Then she got back into her SUV, spun her tires in my gravel driveway, and sped off. That was the first time I got a bad feeling about where this was headed. For the next few weeks, she kept showing up. Sometimes I would see her SUV parked just beyond the property line, as if she were watching my house. Other times, I would find tire tracks cutting across the edge of my pasture, clear evidence that someone had driven through just to snoop around. I installed a few cameras near the front gate, just to have proof in case things escalated. And boy, did they escalate. One morning, I woke up to find my front fence smashed. The wooden posts had been splintered, the wire sagging, and a set of very familiar SUV tire tracks leading right through the break. I checked the footage, and sure enough, there she was, Karen, driving straight through my fence at night, headlights off like she thought she was being clever. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Not only had she trespassed, but she had caused hundreds of dollars in damage to my property. I called the sheriff's department and reported it, and they told me they'd look into it. But when the deputy showed up, he seemed hesitant, almost apologetic, as if he didn't want to get involved. He said it would be hard to prove intent, and that maybe it was just an accident. I showed him the footage, and he shrugged, saying, "We'll file a report." I knew right then that if I wanted this to stop, I was going to have to handle it myself. I fixed the fence that same day, replacing every post, tightening the wire, making sure it was even sturdier than before. 2 nights later, it happened again. This time she didn't even bother to drive slowly, she plowed right through as if to send a message. It wasn't just vandalism anymore, it was harassment. I could feel my blood pressure rising every time I thought about it. This was my land, my sanctuary, and she was violating it over and over. I decided that if she wanted to keep playing games, I was going to end it once and for all. I didn't mean anything violent or illegal, but I knew I had the skills and the resources to set things up so that the next time she tried to drive through my fence, it wouldn't be so easy for her to get away with it. By now, I had started keeping a detailed log of every incident. The date, the time, the damage, the license plate from the camera footage, everything was documented. I figured that eventually, I could take it all to court if I had to. But honestly, I didn't want to wait that long. Every day I saw that broken fence, every time I saw her smug face driving past my gate, it felt like she was winning, like she was proving that she could do whatever she wanted and no one could stop her. That was not going to stand. I spent a few days planning, sketching out ideas, thinking through what I could build that would be completely legal but would make sure that if she tried to drive through my fence again, she would regret it. And when I finally settled on the design, I got to work. I spent the next morning pacing around the broken section of fence, measuring distances, and sketching out ideas on a pad of graph paper. I didn't want anything reckless or dangerous, I wasn't out to hurt anyone physically, but I did want something that would stop a vehicle dead in its tracks if it tried to come barreling through again. My first thought was to install a cattle guard, the kind with metal bars spaced just far enough apart that tires can't get traction, but those are expensive, and besides, she might just drive around it. Then I considered heavy posts sunk deep into the ground with concrete, close enough together that a vehicle couldn't squeeze through. That might work, but if she really wanted to be stubborn, she could still ram them hard enough to break through eventually, and I'd be back to square one. No, what I needed was something smarter. Something that would look like a regular fence from a distance but would surprise the living daylights out of anyone stupid enough to try to drive through. I ended up deciding on a layered approach. First, I reinforced the new section of fence with stronger posts, treated wood sunk deeper into the ground and braced with crossbeams so that the impact wouldn't immediately snap them. Then I added a second layer behind it, hidden just far enough back to be invisible at night unless you knew it was there. For this, I used steel T-posts driven into the ground and a couple of sections of old cattle panel welded together. It created a kind of backstop that would catch anything that made it through the first layer. If someone hit that with a car, it would absolutely wreck the front end, bend the bumper, crack the radiator, the whole 9 yards, but it wouldn't flip the car or risk killing someone. It was the perfect balance, completely legal, just an extra strong fence with reinforced backing. Building it was hard work, and I threw myself into it like a man possessed. I worked all day, digging, hammering, welding, sweating through my shirt until it was plastered to my back. Every strike of the post driver felt like I was reclaiming a little piece of my dignity, telling Karen and the entire HOA that I wasn't going to be bullied. The sound of the metal posts ringing as they went into the ground echoed through the pasture, and even my cattle stood a little farther back, watching me as if they knew something serious was happening. When I finished installing the backing, I strung new wire, tighter than ever, then hung a couple of heavy-duty gates on hinges that could swing open for my tractor but lock securely when I wasn't using them. The whole thing looked good, rustic but strong, like something out of an old western. I stepped back, wiped the sweat off my face, and felt a surge of satisfaction. But I wasn't done. I had one more trick up my sleeve. I rigged a simple system with a motion sensor and a camera that would automatically turn on a spotlight and start recording if a car came near the fence after dark. That way, Even if she tried again, I'd have crystal clear footage from multiple angles, including her license plate, and there'd be no way for her to deny what happened. I installed the camera on a post disguised as part of the fence line, ran the wiring underground to a weatherproof box, and connected it to a backup battery so that even if the power went out, it would still work. By the time I was finished, it was getting dark, and I was sore from head to toe, but I felt ready. That night, I barely slept. I sat on the porch with a thermos of coffee, listening to the crickets and watching the road. Every pair of headlights that passed made my pulse jump. I wanted her to try it. I wanted her to be foolish enough to think she could get away with it again. Hours passed, and nothing happened. Around 2 in the morning, I finally went inside and sat in my recliner, keeping my boots on just in case. The next day came and went uneventfully. 2 more days passed. Then, on the third night, just as I was starting to think maybe she had given up, I heard it, the sound of an engine idling somewhere down the road. I stepped quietly onto the porch and peered through the dark. Sure enough, there were headlights creeping closer, then cutting out entirely as the vehicle slowed near my property line. I could feel my heart pounding as I crouched near the porch rail and waited. The engine revved, tires crunched on gravel, and then the sound I had been waiting for, the roar of acceleration followed by a loud, metallic crash that echoed like a gunshot across the pasture. There was a second impact, the sound of metal twisting, and then the unmistakable hiss of steam from a ruptured radiator. I almost laughed out loud. I grabbed my flashlight and ran toward the fence, camera already recording on my phone. And there it was, Karen's shiny SUV, front end crumpled against my hidden backstop, steam pouring from under the hood. The driver's door flew open, and out she came, yelling and swearing like I had just committed some crime against her. "You can't do this," she shouted, pointing a finger at me. "You can't put something like this on your property. You damaged my car." I held up my phone and kept recording. "You drove through my fence, again. I have you on camera from last time, and now I have you on camera tonight. This is private property. You're trespassing. You need to leave before I call the sheriff." She sputtered and stomped her foot like a child throwing a tantrum. "I'm going to sue you. You can't just booby trap a fence." "It's not a trap," I said calmly. "It's just a fence. A strong fence. The fact that you tried to drive through it is your problem, not mine." By this point, the cameras had picked up everything, her face, her car, the damage, her admission that she had been on my property. I almost felt sorry for her as she tried to back the SUV out, the engine barely turning over before it died completely. She had no choice but to call a tow truck, and I stood there with my arms crossed, watching as they winched her ruined car onto the flatbed. The tow truck driver gave me a little nod, clearly understanding what had happened, and even he looked amused. When they finally left, I felt a wave of triumph wash over me. For the first time in weeks, I slept like a baby. The next morning, I emailed copies of the footage to my lawyer and to the sheriff's department. My lawyer called me back within an hour, laughing so hard he could barely get the words out. "This is gold," he said. "If she even tries to press charges, we'll counter with trespassing, property damage, and harassment. You've got her dead to rights." That was exactly what I wanted. I wasn't just defending my property anymore, I was taking back control of my life. The very next day after the incident, it was as if someone had kicked over a hornet's nest. By mid-morning, I saw a small parade of SUVs and sedans driving slowly past my gate, slowing down to gawk at the freshly repaired fence and the tire marks that told the whole story. I stood on the porch with my coffee, arms crossed, and watched them. Some of the drivers looked shocked. Others, mostly the HOA board members, just glared at me with thinly veiled contempt. By noon, I received a letter hand-delivered to my mailbox, written on HOA letterhead and signed by their legal committee. It was laughable, a page and a half accusing me of creating a dangerous hazard that had caused serious property damage to a resident and demanding that I dismantle my fence immediately or face civil penalties. I sat down at my kitchen table, read it twice, and then let out a long, slow laugh. They had no idea what they were getting themselves into. I forwarded the letter to my attorney along with the video footage. His reply came within an hour: "Do not respond directly. I'll handle this." That was music to my ears. For years, I had been a man who preferred to settle things face to face, but I knew better than to deal with these people on their terms. They thrived on drama, on confrontation, on turning every little disagreement into a spectacle. My lawyer, on the other hand, thrived on paperwork and the law, and he was very good at his job. He drafted a letter of his own, this one on official legal stationery, stating in no uncertain terms that I was within my rights to build and maintain a fence on my property, that I had video evidence of repeated trespassing and vandalism by a member of their association, and that if they pursued legal action, we would countersue for damages, harassment, and attorney fees. He even suggested that I consider filing a criminal complaint. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't staying quiet. She went door to door around the neighborhood, spreading her version of the story, claiming I had set a trap to deliberately damage her car and that I was a danger to the community. She even started a petition to have me removed from the area, which made no sense at all since she had no authority over my property. But still, some of the newer residents seemed to side with her, probably because they didn't know the full story. I didn't go around defending myself to them. Instead, I just let my lawyer do the talking. A week later, the sheriff's department paid me a visit. 2 deputies came out, both of whom I knew by name from years of living in the county. They were professional, polite, and actually seemed a little embarrassed to even be there. They explained that Karen had filed a formal complaint, accusing me of building a booby trap and causing malicious damage to her vehicle. I didn't say much. I just invited them inside, sat them down at my kitchen table, and pulled up the video footage on my laptop. The moment they saw her deliberately turn off her headlights, accelerate toward the fence, and smash through it, they exchanged a look that told me everything I needed to know. When the video ended, one of the deputies let out a low whistle. "Well," he said, "that pretty much settles it. This is clear-cut trespassing and property damage on her part. You're in the clear." I nodded. "Am I within my rights to press charges?" "Yes, sir," the other deputy said. "And honestly, I'd recommend it. This has gone far enough." So that's exactly what I did. My lawyer filed both criminal trespass and vandalism charges against Karen. The day she got served must have been one of the most satisfying days of my life. I was sitting on the porch again when the process server drove up to her house, walked right up to her front door, and handed her the papers. From where I was sitting, I could hear her shrieking, her voice carrying across the quiet neighborhood. It was the sound of someone realizing that their little crusade had backfired spectacularly. The HOA tried one last time to intimidate me, sending out a mass email to the neighborhood accusing me of creating division and escalating tensions. I ignored it. The sheriff's department didn't. When the case went before the judge a few weeks later, all the evidence was laid out, the videos, the repair receipts for my fence, the threatening letters I had received, even statements from a couple of neighbors who had witnessed Karen driving onto my property before. The judge didn't take long to make a decision. Karen was found guilty of trespassing and vandalism, ordered to pay for the damage she had caused, and put on probation. The look on her face when the verdict was read was priceless. She glared at me across the courtroom as if she still thought she was in the right, but there was nothing she could do. The law had spoken. I walked out of that courthouse feeling 10 feet tall. For the first time since this whole mess had started, I felt like justice had been served. But even then, I wasn't done. I had made my point to Karen, but I wanted to make sure the HOA understood that I wasn't someone they could bully. My lawyer sent them a final letter, a cease and desist notice warning them that any further harassment, trespassing, or attempts to enforce rules on my property would result in immediate legal action. That put an end to the HOA letters, the emails, the gossip. Slowly, things started to quiet down again. The weeks after the court ruling were some of the quietest and most peaceful I had experienced in a long time. For the first time in months, I could walk my property at dawn without feeling that familiar weight of tension in my chest. The air felt fresher somehow, the mornings brighter. My fence stood tall and straight, every post braced, every wire taut, and the sight of it filled me with a sense of pride. I had defended what was mine, legally, decisively, and no one could argue with the outcome. The sheriff's department had closed the case, my lawyer had wrapped up all the paperwork, and I was finally free to get back to the life I had before the HOA decided to wage war against me. But while my life became calmer, Karen seemed to unravel. Word spread quickly in a small community, and people who had once stood with her began to distance themselves. It wasn't just that she had lost the case, it was the way she had dragged everyone into it, stirring up drama, wasting their time, and then embarrassing them all when it turned out she had been the one breaking the law. Some neighbors who had signed her petition came by my gate one afternoon, not exactly apologizing but mumbling that they hadn't known the full story, and that they were glad things had been resolved. I didn't hold a grudge. I told them I just wanted peace, that I had no interest in fighting with anyone. After that, the tone of the whole neighborhood seemed to shift. Fewer cars slowed down to glare when they passed my property. The people who used to gossip about me in their HOA meetings found something else to talk about. It was as though everyone realized that I wasn't the villain Karen had made me out to be, I was just a man protecting his home. As for Karen herself, she wasn't seen much after that. Her shiny SUV sat in her driveway for weeks, the front end still dented, as if she couldn't afford to fix it or didn't want to be reminded of what had happened. Eventually, I noticed a for sale sign go up in her yard. Rumor had it that she was resigning from the HOA board and moving back to the city. Whether that was true or not, I didn't much care. Her leaving meant that life here would finally return to normal, and that was good enough for me. With the drama behind me, I turned my attention back to the things that really mattered, my cattle, my barn, and my land. I repaired the sections of pasture fence that had been neglected while I was dealing with court dates and paperwork. I mended the roof on the shed, fixed a water trough that had been leaking, and even planted a small patch of wildflowers near the gate. Each task felt like I was reclaiming a little more of the peace that had been stolen from me. I spent more time sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun go down over the fields, listening to the cicadas. The anger that had burned in me for so long finally started to cool, leaving behind a deep, steady resolve. But I never let my guard down completely. I kept the cameras up, the motion sensors active, and the fence in perfect condition. Not because I expected Karen or anyone else to come back, but because I had learned a valuable lesson. There are always people who think they can push others around, who think they can trample boundaries because they believe they have the power to get away with it. The only way to deal with them is to stand firm, to draw your line in the sand, and make sure they know you won't be moved. My fence wasn't just a barrier anymore. It was a statement, a symbol that said, "This land is mine, and I will protect it." The rest of the HOA eventually seemed to understand that. At the next annual meeting, which I didn't attend but heard about from a sympathetic neighbor, there was a heated debate about whether the HOA should continue trying to pressure non-member properties into following their rules. According to my neighbor, the majority of residents voted to stop pursuing outside enforcement entirely. I couldn't help but grin when I heard that. My case had become the example, the turning point that made them rethink their approach. One evening, just as summer was turning to fall, I stood at the gate and watched as a couple of deer wandered across the pasture, their silhouettes outlined by the fading light. It struck me how close I had come to losing the quiet life I had built here. If I had backed down, if I had given in to Karen's demands, would have been just another resident living under the thumb of an HOA, following rules I never agreed to. But I hadn't backed down. I had fought, and won. That victory didn't just protect my property. It reminded me of who I was, a man who valued freedom, independence, and the right to live life on his own terms. As the months passed, the memory of the entire ordeal became less like a fresh wound and more like an old scar, still there, still a part of me, but no longer painful. There were mornings when I would sip my coffee on the porch and think back on how this all started, a few letters in the mailbox, a smug HOA president, and a broken fence. It was almost hard to believe how far things had escalated, how much time and energy I had been forced to pour into defending something that should never have been in question. And yet, strange as it might sound, I was grateful for it now. Grateful because it had taught me something I might never have learned otherwise. I learned that there are battles worth fighting and battles worth walking away from, and this one had been worth every ounce of effort. Too many people roll over when confronted by bullies, whether those bullies wear suits and sit on boards or drive around with clipboards and cameras. Too many people tell themselves it's not worth the trouble to resist, that it's easier to just comply, to keep the peace. But peace bought with submission isn't peace at all. It's a slow surrender of everything you hold dear until one day you wake up and realize you don't recognize your own life anymore. I wasn't willing to let that happen. This land, this house, this life, I had worked too hard for it to hand it over to someone else's control. There were still moments when I caught sight of the patched section of fence and felt a flicker of anger, a reminder of those long nights when I sat awake listening for the sound of an engine. But that anger didn't consume me anymore. Instead, it fueled a quiet determination to keep my boundaries strong, not just the physical ones, but the personal ones too. The fence wasn't just made of wood and steel. It was made of principle, of the simple belief that a man has the right to live in peace on his own land without interference. That belief was stronger now than it had ever been. Every so often, I still heard rumors about Karen. Someone told me she had sold her house at a loss. Someone else said she had moved in with relatives back in the city. Whatever the truth was, I didn't waste time thinking about it. She had become just another chapter in the story of my life, a cautionary tale about what happens when someone crosses the wrong line. I had no interest in revenge, no interest in gloating. My victory wasn't about her, it was about me. It was about reclaiming my peace, my dignity, and my sense of control. By the time winter rolled around, the neighborhood felt completely different. The HOA still existed, of course, but its power had been checked. People seemed friendlier now, more willing to wave when they passed. Some even stopped to chat at the fence, asking how the cattle were doing, admiring the repairs I'd made. It was as if my stand had reminded everyone of something they had forgotten, that communities work best when people respect each other's space, not when they try to dominate one another. I wasn't naive enough to think there would never be another problem, never another challenge, but I knew I was ready for whatever came next. One particularly cold evening, I stood by the fire in my living room, a cup of hot coffee in my hand, and thought about everything that had happened. I thought about the hours I had spent rebuilding, the nights I had stayed awake, the courtroom sessions, the letters, the shouting matches, the tow truck hauling away that SUV. And then I thought about the sunrise I had watched that very morning, the frost on the grass sparkling like diamonds, the quiet stillness of the world around me. That was the reward. That was what made every moment worth it, knowing that I could still stand here, free and unbroken, on the land I called home. I took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and smiled. This was my place. My sanctuary. My reminder that no matter how much the world tried to push, I could push back harder. The fence was stronger now, the land more secure, and I was stronger too. And if anyone ever tried to challenge that again, well, they would learn the same lesson Karen had learned the hard way: some fences are meant to be respected.